What's up, guys? Thank you for watching. Welcome back to my channel. I'm Justin Burkoltz, and I am filming here for the first time in my new office/studio. Check this out. How cool is this? Guess what? It's time for another book review. This week, I will be reviewing the classic UFO book, probably one of the most referenced books in the UFO field that has ever been written by the GOAT of UFO research, Jacques Vallée himself. That's right. This week we are talking about Passport to Magonia. All right, guys, this is such an interesting book. I know that normally I'm more on top of more recent stuff, but I'm relatively new to the whole UFO topic, so I have a ton of catching up to do, which means I have to go back to some of these oldies but goodies, read them myself because I never read them before, and I want to review them for you guys while I do that. So we're going to be tackling Jacques Vallée's masterpiece today, Passport to Magonia. Do me a quick favor here. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, please just hit that subscribe button real fast. If you like book reviews or videos about UFOs, mysticism, spirituality, hit the like button, share, comment, all that kind of stuff. That's the best way to help me out. Thank you so much. Let's get back to it. Jacques Vallée is one of the original kind of UFO researchers, and he is also just a generally brilliant person. He worked on the earliest version of the internet, and he has worked on a lot of other emerging technology over the decades. But on top of his role, as a scientist and a very serious one at that, he also has a hobby studying UFOs. One of the more interesting bits of trivia about Jacques Vallée is if you have seen the classic UFO movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the French scientist in the movie, played by Francois Truffaut, was actually directly based and modeled on Jacques Vallée. He's basically supposed to be the cinema Hollywood version of Jacques Vallée.
Simplement parce qu'elles n'ont pas regardé la télévision.
It's simply because they never watched the television.
Ou bien elles l'ont regardé, mais elles n'ont pas établi de rapprochement.
Or perhaps they watched it but never made the psychic connection.
It's a coincidence. It's not scientific.
Listen to me, Major Walsh. It is an event sociological.
So that's really interesting. He's been that well known for that long that even in that movie he was considered the preeminent UFO scholar and scientist and researcher. And that still pretty much continues to today. He's still active in the field, giving interviews. He's shown up in recent books like in Diana Pasulka's American Cosmic. She talks about him. If you follow Jesse Michaels on YouTube, he's spoken with Jacques and interviewed him. So he's very much still in the zeitgeist and on top of this topic. But I had never read any of his books. So I wanted to go back and read Passport to Magonia and start there, because I've always been very interested in mythology and folklore and ancient history and all that kind of stuff. If you watch any of the other videos on my channel outside of the UFO topic, I'm sure you know that. And so I was interested to see the kind of parallels that he drew from folklore and mythology to the modern UFO phenomenon. And that's exactly what Passport to Magonia does. And so it says here, the subtitle is actually From Folklore to Flying Saucers. All right, so that gives you a little taste of what this book is about. I also just want to read a quick section from Jacques' own preface here to the book, where he explains kind of what his goal was in writing the book. In his own words, I like to do that for most of the books that I review, because I think it's helpful to know, what the author's intentions were when they wrote the book. So this is what Jacques has to say from the preface. It says, If we take a wide sample of this historical material, we find that it is organized around one central theme: visitation by an aerial people from one or more remote legendary countries. The names and attributes vary, but the main idea clearly does not. Magonia, heaven, hell, elfland, all such places have one common characteristic: we are unable to reach them alive, except, as we shall see, on very special occasions. Emissaries from these supernatural abodes come to Earth, sometimes under human form and sometimes as monsters. They perform wonders. They serve man or fight him. They influence civilizations through mystical revelation. They seduce Earth women. And the few heroes who dare seek their friendship find the girls from Elfland endowed with desires that betray a carnal, rather than purely aerial, nature. This book is an attempt to build a bridge between two clusters of rumors, observations, and reports. On the one hand, the claims of men and women who are alive today and state that they have observed such beings. And on the other, the large body of similar data that has come to us through tradition. He continues, to summarize then, the book you are about to read is an effort to provide systematic documentation and literary illustration of modern folklore in the perspective of ancient myths and traditional legendary material. So you can see here that Jacques Vallée is taking a similar approach to the UFO phenomenon. He calls it modern folklore that Diana Walsh-Pasulka took when she was studying it as a modern kind of emergent religious phenomenon. And I think that is the most interesting way to look at the UFO UAP topic, because a lot of people think this started in the 1940s with Roswell, but it absolutely did not. And we will get into some really interesting examples here of some ancient aliens, ancient UFO sightings anyways, and reports of flying earthenware vessels, saucers, and other such interesting descriptions. But a lot of what he talks about in the book is actually European fairy medieval folklore about people who experience missing time, people who are abducted and reappear in a different place, people who undergo weird genetic hybridization, human fairy processes in some kind of fairyland somewhere, or who are transported to a magical cave and then disappear until, much later, all this kind of stuff. And he talks about how there's these direct parallels from, ancient indigenous folklore and mythology to medieval fairy lore and all the way through to today to the UFO sightings. Beyond that, he talks about some absolutely fascinating sightings from just about the century before Roswell. So going back, to the 1800s, to the 19th century, through the early 20th century, before the whole UFO flying saucer thing was in media and everything else. And there are a lot of interesting descriptions of encounters, abductions, and other very interesting phenomena from that time period. So I'm going to talk about a couple specific examples from the book as I go through the rest of the review. One of my personal favorite parts of this whole book is right at the beginning. And it's where he discusses ancient Japanese sightings of what appear to be UFOs. And this whole part is super interesting. Don't want to make this video super long. I'm not going to read it all to you. But there are a couple little parts here that I just think are so great. I just want to cover them real quickly for you. Okay, so right here in the very first chapter, there is a section where he states that, the common belief at that time in the 1960s when this book was written was that it all started in 1947 with Roswell, and those were the first UFO sightings, and the investigation started after that. However, he gives the case of what he calls the very first documented scientific investigation of a UFO sighting. And it is actually from Japan in 1235. Okay? September 24th, 1235. And it says General Yoritsume was camping with his army. Suddenly, a curious phenomenon was observed. Mysterious sources of light were seen to swing and circle in the southwest, moving in loops until the early morning. General Yoritsume ordered what we would now term a, quote, full-scale scientific investigation, and his consultants set to work. Fairly soon, they made their report. This part is hilarious. Check this out. This was what they stated. The whole thing is completely natural. It is only the wind making the stars sway. It's almost as bad as swamp gas. And it says his source of information for this report was one Yusuke J. Matsumura of Yokohama, who adds his own note to the scholar's explanation and says, scholars on government pay have always made ambiguous statements like this. So, if it makes you feel any better, absurd dismissals of UFO encounters didn't begin with the United States in the 1940s or 50s. Nope, this nonsense has been going on since at least the 13th century in Japan. And it seems like even at that time, government scholars were coming up with bogus explanations for things. Just, oh, that's all natural. Just lights swirling and moving in the sky. It's just the wind moving the stars around. It's just swamp gas. You know, sometimes it appears in one place and then appears in another, and it creates the illusion of movement. Yeah, come on. So, I don't know. I hope that makes you guys feel better. It certainly just made me laugh. And, you know, mysterious lights in the sky, orbs of light that move in strange ways. That is one of the most commonly reported morphologies, or whatever you want to call it, of UFOs. However, one of the other most common types is the prototypical flying saucer, right? Dish-shaped craft, maybe a little bubble in the middle, something like that, right? Looks like a saucer skipping across water is how Kenneth Arnold famously described their movement. And then a reporter took that and said, oh, they're flying saucers. So that term has stuck ever since. But long before Kenneth Arnold ever described a weird craft in the sky, or actually he saw multiple crafts in the sky that looked like saucers, there is a report from 1180, also from Japan, that Jacques talks about in this book, where someone describes a craft that he calls a earthenware vessel, saucer, right? That is flying through the sky. It changes course, and it has a luminous trail behind it. So I think that's really fascinating. As far as I can tell, that is the earliest report of anything like a saucer, dish, round, circular object of that kind that is reported. There are far more ancient reports of orbs of light, balls of fire, flaming shields in the sky from Roman armies, things like that. But they tend to be the orbs of light or the fiery ball type UFOs, not the metallic, round, flying saucer type of UFOs. So as far as I know, that is the very first reference in human history of that specific type of UFO, which is super interesting. But the book doesn't stop there. He discusses the ancient Jomon statues. So if you don't know about the Jomon people, they were a indigenous group of people to Japan that predates the current cultures that we think of as Japanese. This was a super ancient culture, one of the most interesting in the ancient world. And it was advanced in a lot of ways. As far as we know, they were the first people in the entire world to make pottery, to invent pottery and make it. It also appears that their civilization lasted for somewhere around 14,000 years in some form or another, and then was assimilated into modern Japanese culture and up till today. But the ancient Jomon made these really weird statues, so their culture lasted for a very long time, and like I stated, they invented pottery, as far as I can tell. They also started making these really cool little statues out of clay and firing them, and so some of those have survived. Well, some of those weird statues look like people wearing strange, sophisticated mechanical helmets of some kind. Let's just put it that way. They look like astronauts or scuba divers or something like that. They are clearly humanoid people wearing weird helmets. Helmets that don't really make sense in the cultural context. They've never even found a helmet that looks like that from any part of ancient Japan. And they don't all look the same either. Some of the helmets have like slits like this. Some have like perforated holes with like a mouthpiece looking thing. Kind of like a hazmat, like face shield mask with the breathing apparatus on it, right? Whatever those weird Jomon statues with helmets were, one thing is for certain. We can tell there was a lot of weird stuff going on in the skies over Japan. There are numerous reports going back to at least the 10th century, from what I saw here in Japan, of weird objects in the sky, all the way through, to the present. In fact, right outside of Fukushima, where there's a nuclear, reactor there, power plant, there is a UFO museum. And the local town there is obsessed with UFOs, and they've said that they have seen, numerous UFOs in that area forever. Their ancestors saw them; they see them. There's a lot of UFO activity that has gone on in Japan, going back at least 1,000 years. And if you count the strange Jomon helmet things as possible visitation from aliens or future humans or whatever UFOs are, it could potentially go back thousands of years, even 10,000 years or so visitation there. We don't know. What we do know is, like I said, lots of strange stuff in the sky over ancient Japan that I didn't know much about until reading Passport to Magonia. There is one more specific incident that I want to talk about from the book here, because I think it is highly relevant to Americans and to my American audience, to myself. I thought this was super interesting. And this is a report from none other than Alexander Hamilton, who observed quite the UFO. That's right, the Alexander Hamilton had his own UFO experience. States here that on April 21st, 1897, Alexander Hamilton wrote that he was awakened by a noise among the cattle and went out with 2 other men. He then saw an airship descend gently toward the ground and hover within 50 yards of it. Quote, "It consisted of a great cigar-shaped portion, possibly 300 feet long, with a carriage underneath. The carriage was made of glass, or some other transparent substance, alternating with a narrow strip of some material. It was brilliantly lighted within, and everything was plainly visible. It was occupied by 6 of the strangest beings I ever saw. They were jabbering together, but we could not understand a word they said. Upon seeing the witnesses, the pilots of the strange ship turned on some unknown power, and the ship rose about 300 feet above them. It seemed to pause and hovered directly over a 2-year-old heifer cow, which was bawling and jumping, apparently fast in the fence. Going to her, we found a cable about half an inch in thickness, made of some red material, fastened in a slip knot around her neck, one end passing up to the vessel, and the heifer tangled in the wire fence. We tried to get it off, but could not. So we cut the wire loose and stood in amazement to see the ship, cow and all, rise slowly, disappearing in the northwest. Hamilton was so frightened by this that he couldn't sleep. Rising early Tuesday, I started out by horse, hoping to find some trace of my cow. This I failed to do, but coming back in the evening, found that Link Thomas, about 3 or 4 miles west of Leroy, had found the hide, legs, and head in his field that day. He, thinking someone had butchered a stolen beast, had brought the hide to town for identification, but was greatly mystified in not being able to find any tracks in the soft ground. After identifying the hide by my brand, I went home. But every time I would drop to sleep, I would see the cursed thing with its big lights and hideous people. I don't know whether they are devils or angels or what, but we all saw them, and my whole family saw the ship, and I don't want any more to do with them. So I find that report incredibly fascinating, not only because it's from the late 19th century and from someone as prominent as Alexander Hamilton, but that it also has the ties to the cattle mutilation phenomenon that seems to be strangely mixed up in this whole UFO thing. You know, I don't know what's going on with the cattle, why they disappear, why they get pulled up into the sky by an airship and we only find few parts of them afterwards, no tracks on the ground. It had to have been dropped there after they dissected it or something. But that phenomenon continues to this day. And obviously, people have heard about cattle mutilations. It's not a fun topic to look into. I get it. It's gross. I don't even eat meat. So I don't even like eat beef. I don't want to see cows being torn apart, cut apart, open, that kind of thing. I get it. But you can't leave that part of the UFO phenomenon out. It's an important piece of the puzzle. And I find it super fascinating that it goes all the way back to Alexander Hamilton. And for those of you who have been following very recent developments in the UFO UAP field, I'm sure you're familiar with the term psionics. Maybe you've seen the News Nation interview or the Jesse Michaels interview with Jake Barber or any of the other people on his team from Skywatcher who claim that they can psychically communicate with, summon, call non-human intelligence and these UAPs, UFOs, that they can actually connect to them with their mind and summon them at will, and that they will appear. Well, it might interest you to know that Jacques talks about this in his book. And what he talks about is actually ancient writers and the kind of occult literature, as people call it, of people who would summon fairies or demons or angels or whatever and communicate with them. Well, this is almost exactly what the whole psionics thing is about today, and it's how I first got interested in the UFO topic in the first place. I was studying esoteric and occult literature. I was studying people who believed that they could summon or contact non-human intelligence and get information from those intelligences and downloads and things like this. And it directly led me into the UFO topic. And the psionics thing, the summoning of non-human intelligences, that is a direct through line from ancient esoteric and occult practices to modern UFO lore that is happening right now with Jake Barber and the Skywatcher crew. I think we need to take a new look at the history of demons and angels and fairies and all this kind of folklore and religious history, and see if maybe there's a better way to interpret those stories rather than purely psychological. And there's just one more quick quote from Jacques I want to leave you with today, kind of summarizing the book. If you like comparative mythology, learning about folklore, learning about how things in the ancient past relate to things today. If that interests you, I know you'll love this book. So let me leave you with one last quote from Jacques here. At the end of the book, he states, if we decide to avoid extreme speculation but to make certain basic observations from the existing data, 5 principal facts stand out rather clearly. Fact 1. There has been among the public in all countries since the middle of 1946 an extremely active generation of colorful rumors. They center on a considerable number of observations of unknown machines close to the ground in rural areas, the physical traces left by these machines, and their various effects on humans and animals. Fact 2. When the underlying archetypes are extracted from these rumors, the saucer myth is seen to coincide to a remarkable degree with the fairy faith of Celtic countries, the observations of the scholars of past ages, and the widespread belief among all peoples concerning entities whose physical and psychological descriptions place them in the same category as the present-day UFOnauts. Fact 3. The entities human witnesses report to have seen, heard, and touched fall into various biological types. Among them are beings of giant stature, men indistinguishable from us, winged creatures, and various types of monsters. Most of the so-called pilots, however, are dwarfs, and form 2 main groups. 1, dark hairy beings identical to the gnomes of medieval theory, with small bright eyes and deep rugged old voices, and 2, beings who answer the description of the sylphs of the Middle Ages or the elves of the fairy faith, with human complexions, oversized heads, and silvery voices. All the beings have been described with and without breathing apparatus. Beings of various categories have been reported together. Fact number 4. The entity's reported behavior is as consistently absurd as the appearance of their craft is ludicrous. In numerous instances of verbal communication with them, their assertions have been systematically misleading. This is true for all cases on record, from encounters with the gentry in the British Isles to conversations with airship engineers during the 1897 Midwest Flap, and discussions with the alleged Martians in Europe, North and South America, and elsewhere. This absurd behavior has had the effect of keeping professional scientists away from the area where that activity was taking place. It has also served to give the saucer myth its religious and mystical overtones. Fact number 5. The mechanism of the apparitions in legendary, historical, and modern times is standard and follows the model of religious miracles. Several cases which bear the official stamp of the Catholic Church, such as the Lady of Fatima in Guadalupe, etc., are in fact, if one applies the definition strictly, nothing more than UFO phenomena where the entity has delivered a message having to do with religious beliefs rather than with fertilizers or engineering. But the book doesn't just end there by, with the narrative portion of the book. That's only half of the pages here. So if you take a look, this half of the book is the actual narrative text I just described to you. The second half of the book is a catalog of 1 century from 1868 to 1968 of UFO sightings. He discusses when, where, who was involved, all of that, as much detail as he can, and it just lists, I don't know how many hundreds of reports. So if you want an in-depth catalog of early UFO sightings of that century, right? So mid 19th century to mid 20th century, I don't think you'll find a better source for that. But if you also want some really fascinating speculation and comparison and all of that, the first part of the book goes into all of that. So once again, this book here, Passport to Magonia by Jacques Vallée, is just an absolute treasure and masterpiece. And if you are interested in the UFO topic at all, you've got to get yourself a copy. You have to read the book. It's going to be referenced in every other UFO book you read. It kept happening to me, and so I went, oh my god, I got to read this thing myself. I had seen, multiple interviews with Jacques, and of course he's written a bunch of books since then, The Invisible College among them, another really famous one. I'm sure I'll get to that one soon. But seriously, you've got to get yourself a copy, give it a read, quickly flip through the catalog if you don't want to go through it in depth. But man, I'm going to be coming back to that for some future videos, I can assure you that. So that's it for my review today. I hope you liked the video. If you are interested in any of that stuff I was talking about, get yourself a copy, and join me again next time for my next book review. Really quickly here, do me a favor. If you are not subscribed to my channel, please hit that subscribe button right now. I am so close to 1,000 subscribers and being able to, unlock some monetization here for the channel. I don't do this to make money. I do it because I like it, and to share, interesting books with people, to promote reading. I think reading books is good for people, for society, and to promote open-mindedness about weird topics like mysticism and UFOs and stuff like that. And so I do my best to cover them with an open mind, an open heart, compassionately listening to people instead of just brushing them off. If you're interested in this kind of stuff and you're not subscribed, please hit that subscribe button for me. Hit the like button as well for the video. Leave me a comment, share, all that kind of stuff. That's the best way to help me out.